The karate champion hit the pavement before he understood he'd been moved. 1 second he'd been standing in the heat with his arms folded, humoring the big bodybuilder's demonstration, and the next he was sitting on the concrete of a Hong Kong film lot with his gin twisted and 40 crew members staring, having been picked up and set down by a grip so sudden and so total that his own considerable skill had never gotten a vote. He was not hurt. He was something worse than hurt. He was embarrassed, in front of everyone, by a man the whole production had spent 3 weeks treating as furniture. To understand why the strongest man on that set needed to put a champion on the ground that afternoon, and why, 10 minutes later, he made the far more dangerous decision to put his hand on Bruce Lee, you have to understand what it is like to be built the way that man was built, and to have nobody take you seriously because of it. His name was Bolo. That was what everyone called him. The name that would follow him onto screens for the next 40 years, and off the lot, his name was Yang She, and he was the most muscular human being most of the crew had ever stood next to. He had been Mr. Hong Kong. He had built that body the hard way, in an era and a place where there were no supplements and no science, just iron and years. And before any of that, he had done a thing almost nobody knew about, which was that he had swum out of mainland China as a young man across open water, away from a famine that had taken people he loved, and had arrived with nothing but the body he'd made and the will that made it. He was not a soft man, and he had never had a soft day. If you want to understand why a man like that turns dangerous on a film set, stay with this, because it was not vanity, and it was not stupidity. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The industry had decided what he was. He was the muscle. He was the thing they stood in the background of a shot to make the hero look brave for facing it. Directors posed him. Photographers oiled him. Nobody, not one person in 3 years of pictures had ever asked him whether he could actually fight, because the question did not occur to them. A body like that was a prop, and props do not have skill, they have dimensions. And the truth, the thing that sat in him like a stone, was that he could fight, genuinely, that under all that engineered muscle was a real martial artist who had trained seriously for years, and that every single day on every single set he watched people give respect to men he knew he could handle, because those men looked like fighters, and he looked like a poster. So when the American arrived, something in Bolo had already been waiting. The American was Jim Kelly, and he was the real thing too, a genuine karate champion, sharp and fast and cool, brought over for the picture because he had something on camera that could not be faked. He was not a cruel man, but he was a confident one, and on his second day, watching Bolo do a shirtless strength bit for the camera, he had said a thing to another cast member that was not meant unkindly and that traveled the way such things travel on a set. He'd said the big man was put together beautifully, and then he'd smiled and said that muscle like that was for lifting, not for fighting, that he'd take speed over size every day of the week. It got a laugh. It got back to Bolo by lunch. And Bolo, who had spent 3 years being the thing in the background, decided that afternoon that he was finished being it. He asked Kelly in front of the crew whether he'd like to show everyone the difference between speed and size. He asked it politely, which was worse than if he hadn't. Kelly, who could not say no without looking afraid, agreed to a friendly demonstration and squared up loose and easy and threw a couple of quick sharp things to make his point, and Bolo took them, walked through them, closed the distance that speed needs and strength hates, got one enormous hand on the champion and put him on the ground, not viciously, completely. It was the completeness that stung. Kelly got up with his jaw set and his dignity in pieces, and the crew looking at their shoes, and Bolo did not gloat, and somehow the not gloating made it land even harder. The whole set had gone quiet, the specific quiet of a working crew that has just watched something it will be talking about at dinner. A sound man had lowered his boom without being told. 2 grips near the truck had stopped coiling cable. A young production assistant stood holding a tray of tea. Nobody was going to drink now, not sure whether to put it down. And into that quiet, from over by the camera, a voice said something short in Cantonese, and everyone turned. Bruce had been setting up a shot. He was the reason the production existed. It was his picture, his choreography, his name on the thing, and he had watched the entire exchange from beside the camera with an expression nobody could read. What he'd said quietly was not to Bolo, it was to Kelly, 3 or 4 words, an aside, and the men close enough to hear it said later that it was kind, that it was some version of let it go, that's not the fight. Then he handed his notes to an assistant and walked out into the middle of the lot, unhurried in his white t-shirt, and stopped in front of the biggest man on the set. Stay with this, because the next thing that happened is the thing the crew argued about for years, and it started with Bolo making the worst read of his life. Bolo looked at the small man who had come to stand in front of him, 140 pounds, no bigger than Kelly, smaller, and he saw one more person arriving to put him back in the background, one more man who looked like a fighter, coming to be given respect that Bolo had to earn with his whole life and never got. And the frustration of 3 years came up in him all at once, and he did the thing he'd been building toward all afternoon. He reached out and closed one enormous hand around the front of Bruce's shirt at the shoulder, and gathered the fabric into a fist, and did not pull yet, just held it, a grip that could crush a can flat clamped onto a smaller man's shirt in front of 40 people, and he looked down and waited to see the fear. Bruce looked up at him. There was no fear. There was, if anything, something almost gentle, the look of a man who has recognized something in another man that the other man does not know is visible. And Bruce said quietly in Cantonese, so that it was between the two of them, "You can fight. I have been watching you for 3 weeks. You are not what they think you are." The grip did not loosen, but something behind Bolo's eyes flickered, because those were not the words he was braced for. And then Bruce said the second thing, still quiet, still even, "But your hand is on my shirt, and in a moment I am going to take it off, and I want you to pay attention to how, because it is the thing you have been missing." What happened next took under 2 seconds, and it was not a throw, and it was not a strike, and the crew who were close enough could not fully explain it because they were watching for the wrong thing. They expected Bruce to attack the hand, to pry at the fingers, to strike the wrist, the way you fight a grip. He did not touch the fingers at all. Instead, he stepped in and turned, rolling his own shoulder forward and under, and as he turned, he brought his arm up over the top of Bolo's gripping forearm and simply kept turning so that the arm Bolo was holding him with, that tremendous iron unbeatable arm, was drawn out straight and then passed straight, the elbow arriving at the one angle in the human body where muscle provides no protection at all. Because a joint at its mechanical limit does not care how strong the muscle around it is. This is the thing the strongest men understand last, if they ever understand it at all. Muscle moves bone, and muscle holds a position against force, but muscle cannot protect a hinge that has already been carried past the edge of where it bends. The bicep that could curl 300 pounds was at that exact angle, no more use to Bolo than a length of rope. Strength holds a position. It cannot unbend an elbow that is already open past its stop. Bolo was the strongest man on that set by a wide margin, and all of that strength suddenly meant nothing, because it had nothing to push against. His own locked, extended arm had become a lever, and the small man was standing at the good end of it, and the only thing at the bottom of that lever was Bolo's shoulder, and the only thing under his shoulder was the ground. He went down, not hurled, lowered, folded down onto one knee on the hot concrete by the mechanics of his own captured arm, held there at the exact edge where 1 more degree would have hurt him badly, and not 1 degree past it. Bruce had taken the strongest man in Hong Kong to the ground with the man's own strength, and had done it so precisely that Bolo was completely unhurt and completely helpless at the same time, and both of them knew it. The set was silent. Kelly, still brushing off his gourd, had gone very still. 40 crew members stood frozen with equipment in their hands. And here is where it did not go the way these things go. Stay with this, because Bruce did not hold him there to make a point, and he did not let the crew look at the big man on his knee. He let go instantly. The moment Bolo was down, Bruce released the arm completely and stepped back and put his hand out, an actual hand, offered down, and there was nothing in his face but respect. And he said loud enough this time for the crew to hear, in Cantonese and then again in English, so the American crew understood it too. "This man is a real fighter, not a strong man, a fighter. I have watched him for 3 weeks, and none of you have seen it, and that is your mistake, not his." Bolo knelt there and looked at the offered hand, the way Sonny Liston might have, the way any man looks at the first hand in a long time that does not want to put him back where he came from. And then he took it, and Bruce, who could not have lifted a fraction of what Bolo could lift, helped the biggest man on the set to his feet, and the two of them stood there a moment, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the arm, because the thing Bolo had wanted, the thing underneath the demonstration and the grip and the 3 years of frustration, had never actually been to beat anyone. It had been for one person in the whole industry to look at him and see a martial artist instead of a mountain of muscle. And the one person who finally did it was the man who had just put him on the ground, who had beaten him, and then in the same breath defended him to the entire crew, in 2 languages, as the real fighter Bolo had always known himself to be, and never been called. The director, who had been about to lose his afternoon and possibly his 2 leads, watched this happen and had the sense to say nothing at all. Jim Kelly came over after. He was a champion, and champions understand these things faster than anyone, and he put out his own hand to Bolo and said straight that the takedown earlier had been real and clean, and that he'd underestimated him, and that he wouldn't do it twice. And Bolo shook it, and the thing that had started as a humiliation on both sides quietly became the opposite, which is a thing that only happens when the men involved are all actually the real thing. That afternoon they went back to work, and the picture got finished, and it became one of the most famous martial arts films ever made. But the part that mattered wasn't in the movie. It was that the small man in the white t-shirt had spent the rest of that shoot using Bolo differently than any director had ever used him, not as scenery to stand behind the hero, but as a genuine opponent worth building a real fight around, choreographing sequences that let the whole world finally see what Bruce had seen from beside the camera in the first week. Bolo Yeung went on to work in martial arts films for the next 40 years, long after the small man in the white t-shirt was gone. He became, in his own right, one of the most recognizable figures the genre ever produced, the great physical villain a generation grew up fearing. And in the interviews, across all those decades, when people asked him about the beginning, about the man who had made him, he never told the story of the arm. He told it a different way every time, but it always came down to the same thing. He would say that everyone else had looked at him and seen a body, and that one man had looked at him and seen a fighter, had beaten him in 2 seconds to prove he could, and then turned around and told the whole set that Bolo was the real thing, and that he had spent the rest of his life trying to be worth what that man had said about him out loud, on a hot afternoon, in front of everyone, before either of them was famous.